Well, thanks, Adnan. As you know, there have been these parallels between Bolsonaro and Trump. And he tried to get a bill passed in Congress that would change the system of voting from the electronic vote, which they have now, to paper ballot system, even though he had no evidence that the electronic voting produced fraud. It was just allegations, as with Trump and mail-in ballots in the U.S. The bill didn't pass, but he's now saying that the results in 2022 could well be fraudulent, and that maybe the election shouldn't happen. So there are some eerie parallels here between what Trump did in 2020 and what Bolsonaro seems to be trying to do right now. The Skiza Atlas showed that his government was positively evaluated by 35% of those surveyed. This was done between 30th of August and 4th September. But it also showed that 64% of people negatively evaluate his government. So he's got a core of support, but it's not the majority of the population. There's also a very interesting issue in the demonstrations today that people will be looking at carefully, and that's to what extent members of the state police forces participate in these demonstrations. Because they are allowed to by law, not in uniform and not with a gun, but they're allowed to go plainclothes and express their views as any other citizen would in demonstrations. But if they're caught on camera shouting for things like closing the Supreme Court or closing Congress or having some kind of coup, which is the language that is sometimes used by supporters of Bolsonaro, then they will be in a little bit more hot water legally. And this is important because if Bolsonaro were to try something like 6th of January 2021 in the U.S., it's the military police forces, the state military police forces, that might furnish the shock troops for that kind of act. Probably his most positive act was passing the pension reform at the end of his first year in office, which was something he delegated to his his economics minister and Congress, the president of the lower house of Congress. Bolsonaro is not a constructive politician. He's not a politician who's able to convey to people a sort of positive program in terms of policy. He's the opposite of a policy wonk. He's sort of he's a campaigner. He's someone who loves to appear in front of the people and pose as a kind of savior of the country. But in terms of the policy content, there's often nothing there. He's again delegated to the so-called Central, this majoritarian bloc in Congress, the tough work of passing legislation. So there are some things going on. There's some interesting initiatives by his government, but he is almost as if he's also a critic. He's so intent on being a critic of the establishment and attacking the other powers, including the Supreme Court, including the Congress, that he's simultaneously an incumbent, but also someone in opposition. So it's a very schizophrenic government in that way, I think.
It certainly